Hello again everyone, and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at the Flysimware Learjet 35A. The aircraft recently released for Microsoft Flight Simulator, albeit it's currently available in early access. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with Flysimware and their excellent Cessna 414 Chancellor. The Chancellor, I would say, is still one of the best add-ons available for the sim, so very much looking forward to seeing what the little Learjet has to offer. It's great to see a Learjet back in a Microsoft Flight Simulator, albeit, of course, we have the 35 as opposed to the 45. In celebration of the Learjet's arrival, I thought there was only one destination that was appropriate really for our flight here today. We're going to be loosely keeping that a secret throughout the flight, but I'm sure that many of you have already guessed, and certainly I'm sure that many of you will along the way. We are going to be covering the aircraft today in quite some depth during the video, including the full startup process more or less, which will take quite some time. The flight itself certainly presented a nice little challenge. We've got a busy departure out of Toronto, where we're currently on the ground, and an interesting non-precision approach in towards destination later on this morning. We're ferrying a businessman on board our jet today. He's been over in Toronto. We're now heading home towards Chicago. As usual, given that this is an early access product, do bear in mind that things will change between now and the final release. There are still systems that need finishing up, texturing work that needs to be done, sounds as well could use some further improvement. I'll try and touch on all of those issues as we go, but with the Learjet being a Flysimware aircraft, I'm fairly sure that we will see those improvements at a later date. I certainly enjoyed today's flight, I hope you do as well. As always, if you do, please consider giving the video a like and subscribing to the channel. And if you'd like to help support the channel further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. I'll leave a link to both of those down in the video description below. So good morning and welcome to the cockpit of the Flysimware Learjet 35. As you can see, it's a pretty cramped operating environment here in the Learjet, as is true to life of the real-world aircraft. As usual, Flysimware have done a very nice job here with the modelling. There are certain areas of the cockpit that could still use some work in terms of the texturing, as you can see. And the same is true of the systems. The systems depth, whilst very good currently, there are still certain systems that aren't modelled. Again though, this is an early access version of the aircraft, and Flysimware have said they'll continue to put out updates. I'm sure that they will. They put out plenty of extra work for their Cessna 414. Anyway, once again, we're currently on the ground at Toronto's City Airport. We've got the jet closed up. We've got our passenger there down the back. He's bound for Chicago this morning. Despite the size of both the Learjet and its cockpit, there is actually quite a lot for us to do here during the setup. So as usual, we're going to be running through a full con dark start, but we are going to skip over some of the test procedures along the way. Otherwise, we could easily be sat here for over an hour, probably getting the aircraft set up. So for the pre-flight checklist, the flight controls, first just checking those are full and free. And indeed they are. For the oxygen system, not currently modelled on the aircraft, but the oxygen pressure is checked. Same for the circuit breakers, those aren't currently modelled. And I suspect they won't be at any point. They're not currently modelled on the Flysimware Cessna 414. But the circuit breakers are checked. For the emergency power system tests, the emergency battery can come through to standby. And you can see there we do see the standby attitude indicator start to erect. We've also got the emergency power caution lights. We'll take the switch through to the on position. And we now have 3 green lights there on the gear indication, so the test is complete. We'll take the emergency battery back through to standby. The fuel computers, they're buried away down behind the yoke. They're both selected on. Anti-skid is selected on, landing gear switch is down. Lead air switches are both selected on. The emergency pressure switch, again not currently modelled, but that's in the normal position, and guarded. The jet pumps are on, pitch trim is set through to primary. The battery check will take battery 1 on. As you can hear, nice sounds overall during the power up. We've got about 25 volts there on battery 1. We'll take battery 2, and showing about the same there on battery 2, we'll take both batteries on. No GPU available today for the inverters, we'll take the primary inverter on. Again, nice sounds on the aircraft overall. There are certain areas that still need some work. So with the primary inverter selected, the AC volts are checked, they're up in the green bands. Same there with the secondary inverter. Just checking the secondary AC bus. Again, everything looks good. So we'll take both inverters on for the time being. The emergency air pressure is checked. The hydraulic pressure, we're supposed to see 1000 psi. You can see currently we're showing 0, so if we take the hydraulic pump on, you can see that does pressurize the system. However, as soon as we turn that pump off again, the pressure falls straight off. I suspect, looking at the checklist, that's probably inaccurate. I would imagine as well there's some sort of accumulator there in the system to keep the pressure, but I could be wrong on that. Anyway, the hydraulic pump switch is selected off. Parking brake is set. We'll carry out a warning light test. That's just buried away under the glare shield. And the lights look good. The landing gear will carry out a test. We do have the unsafe indication, as well as the gear warning horn. And we'll test out the mute function. The fire detection system. Just carrying out the test. You can see there both fire handles are illuminated and we have the master warning. So we can release the button, we'll go back to the test off position. We don't have a GPU available today on the aircraft, so we'll be starting the left-hand engine. We'll use that to provide power as we run through the rest of the setup. So for the engine start checks, the cabin door is visually checked closed, the door warning light is out, anti-ice is selected off, the left and right fuel computers are once again checked on, batteries selected on, and the voltages are checked, primary inverter is verified on. Parking brake is set, the hydraulic pump is selected off, cooling fan is off, same there for the auxiliary heat. Take the nav lights and the beacon light on. Thrust levers are in the cut-off position, the engine sync, buried away here between the throttles, is currently selected off and also, again, currently inoperative. Again, we'll be starting the left-hand engine first, so the start gen switch can go through to the start position. And you can see the start light there is illuminated. Before we introduce the fuel, we're looking for at least 10% here on the turbine and M1 rotation. We're going to wait there until we come up through about 20% here in terms of our N2. And there's 20%. We'll set the thrust lever into the idle position. So you can see we do have a good light off. We've got the start light as well as the air ignition light, expecting to see both of those. We do have a fuel flow and the oil pressure coming up. So just waiting here on the number one engine to stabilise. Through 45 to 50% we should see the starter cutout. There's 50%, the light is out. So we can take the left generator on. That's of course going to power the aircraft here, again as we run through the rest of our startup process. So continuing on with the pre-flight checks, the standby attitude indicator is uncaged and set. The animation there for the caging is very minimal, so it's actually quite hard to see which state you have the standby attitude indicator in, but that's set. Altimeters are set. We've got QNH 29.42. Cabin altitude warning. Again, using the test switch there. And you can hear we do have the warning. We can hit the horn silence. And the test is complete. For the stick puller Mach warning test, the inverters, we'll take the primary inverter on. Pitch trim, we'll set through to the takeoff range. The left stall warning switch is selected on. And we'll come through to the Mach test. So we should see control column movement there. We don't. The control columns don't seem to be currently animated. You'll see that as well during the stall warning test. But we do have the aural overspeed warning, so the test is complete. We'll release the button. For the Mach trim test, we'll go through to Mach trim. And we should see the aircraft trimming nose up. Indeed we do. Again, we have the aural warning. We do have the Mach trim warning there as well on the glare shield. So the test is complete. And lastly, for the stall warning, the flaps are selected up, indicating up. Stall warning switches, we'll take both of those on now. We'll come through to the left stall warning. And we'll hit the test. Again, you can hear we have the stick shaker sounds, but no animation there on the yokes. The angle of attack indicator has come through to the red band. And again, we can release the button. Test is complete. Next part of the checklist, we'll take the flaps down. We should apparently see the angle of attack indicator move. Not showing any indication there. And we'll take the stall warning switches off once again. Flaps are checked. The pressurization and climate controls, the left and right bleed switches are both selected on. Cabin air switch is selected on. Pressurization we'll leave in auto. And for the cruise altitude, going up to flight level 400 today, so we can set that. There's flight level 400, that's giving us a cabin altitude of around 6,500 feet. Cooling fan is selected off, and the temperature mode selector set through to auto. We'll just center up the manual selector here as well. Again, there's the trim check, the autopilot check, and the yaw damper test. We'll skip over those just to save a little bit of time. The fuel panel, we can reset the fuel counter here to 0. And indicating 0. Fuel quantities, fuel on board, just over £6,000, plenty of fuel to get us over towards Chicago. Jet pumps are selected on, the crossflow switch is selected off, the transfer switch is selected off, and the fuel jettison switch is off. Drag chute handle is stowed, doesn't look as though that's currently modelled either on the aircraft. And again, the CVR test, not currently modelled. We are now good to start the other engine. So same procedure as before. We'll come into the right start position. We do have the start light. Not much point heading outside for the external start sounds at the moment. They are very lackluster as it stands. I'm sure they'll see extra work in the future. So again, just waiting on 20%. There's 20, we'll take the fuel on. Good light off, we do have fuel flow. And the oil pressure coming up. So just waiting on the engine to stabilise. Once again, around 50%, we should see the starter cutouts. There's 50%, we'll take the right-hand generator on. So we do have 2 good starts for the after-start checklists. The spoiler on check, the flaps are selected fully down, indicating fully down. The yoke is in the centre position. The spoiler on reset switch we can hold up, and then we'll make left and right bank inputs. You can see we do have the AUG L switch there. I presume that stands for augmented ailerons. Releasing the switch, and the caution light is now extinguished, so everything working correctly there. For the spoiler switch, we'll set those through to extend. And we do have the spoiler indication. Apparently that should currently be flashing. It's not, so again, a little bit of a systems inaccuracy there, I believe. Anyway, we'll retract the flaps. With the flaps retracted, we should now see the spoiler light there illuminated, no longer flashing. Flaps are indicated up, we can retract the spoilers once again. A little bit of a hardware binding issue there on my end. Spoilers are retracted. And the light is out. For the generator check, the cooling fan once again selected off, same for the auxiliary heat. Battery 1 and 2 is selected off. And for the amps there, we're looking for no more than 100 amps. We're showing about 50 currently. The generator check is good, both batteries back on. Avionics master is selected on, the autopilot master switch is a little bit buried away down here on the left of the yoke. We'll select that on. Radar, unfortunately not currently modelled on the aircraft, which is a little bit surprising since it does work in the Cessna 414, but you see if we want to come here through to the standby position, even the standby position not currently modelled, so we'll just leave the radar off of the flight here today. For the GPS and CDI, we'll get those set up here for the flight. So just initializing our Garmin GTN XI. As always, worth noting this is a payware add-on separate from the aircraft.
HOTAS system test OK.
Available from TDS. So we'll get our flight plan set up. We're departing today out of Toronto City Airport, Charlie Yankee Tango Zulu. And we're going to be flying the Perlo for departure off runway 26. That's going to take us out towards waypoint Durlo. We'll load up the departure. After Durlo, we're going to be tracking to waypoint Query. Then on towards waypoint Bagel.
Ground Jazz 494, what's your short off the field?
And then on to the Charlie Golf Tango VOR, Chicago Heights. That's going to take us towards destination, which is Kilo Charlie Golf X-Ray. I've had to set that up as a user airport. You'll see why later on. That's it in terms of the routing. We'll just tune up the city localizer here for runway 26 in case we need to return. That's on a frequency of 110.15.
Jazz 494, ground, good morning, for de-icing, taxi Bravo, hold short Bravo 3.
So we've got that there in the primary. In terms of the departure itself, it's runway heading initially. We'll brief up the departure in just a moment's time. Through 800 feet there, we're going to be making a right-hand turn, tracking on a course of 150 more or less, so we'll set that up. That's going to be more useful to us than setting runway heading. As always, that's going to take a little bit of time here just to slew the selections around. So we've got 150 there on the heading. We'll take the same here on the CDI. And as you can see, we've already got the CDI here as well, slewed to the GPS. It's an RNAV departure.
Rica 3435, ground, good day, taxi November, Alpha, Hotel, cross runway 33 right.
So we've got 150 there on the course, same there on the heading bug. GPS and CDI are set, the transponder is currently in standby. Altimeters, once again, we've got 29.42, that's giving us an aerodrome elevation of around 260 feet. The altitude pre-select initially cleared up to 2,000 feet. We have 2,000 pre-selected. The takeoff data, BRV2 is 133. Flaps up at 160. And initial speed restriction of 210 knots, so we'll set that. You can see there initially the speed bug is very slow to move, which is a little bit strange. You may even think it's not working correctly, but it does work. So we'll just slew that round to 210.
Jazz 494, contact ground 1219, or take care. 219, Jazz 494, see ya.
And there's 210 again, that's the initial speed restriction here for the departure, until we've made the turn. For the trim, takeoff trim setting is going to be 6 units nose up. That trim is set. Anti-skid, once again, is selected on. Passenger signs are selected on. And head here of the taxi, we'll take the taxi lights on as well. Secondary inverter is selected on. We are now ready for the taxi. Again, though, we'll just brief up the departure here before we make a move. So again, it's going to be the Perlo for departure off runway 26 here at Toronto City. That has us tracking straight ahead initially, runway heading 262. Out towards 800 feet, passing through 800, it's going to be a left-hand turn to track inbound towards waypoint MDOS. Again, maintaining 210 knots initially and an altitude of 2,000 feet. After MDOS, we're going to be on a manual leg, radar vectors, eventually cleared out towards waypoint Ankol. In terms of the terrain, the MSA for the departure, 3,100 feet. Weather-wise, actually a pretty decent day here overall, as you can see. Cloud base is pretty good. We can come back in for the localizer approach onto runway 26. There's a pretty stiff headwind down 26 as well, so no option there for the ILS onto 08. In terms of the taxi as well, that's pretty straightforward. We're just going to make a left-hand turn. We'll join on to taxiway Charlie. In fact, you can see it here on the GTN unit. So we'll be making a backtrack here onto Charlie, joining onto Delta, and then out for the holding point of runway 26. It's going to be a full-length departure, flaps 20. We're pretty limited in terms of our takeoff run here today. So we'll make our way out towards the runway, just the before takeoff checklist left to run, and then we'll get this little rocket of an aeroplane blasting off runway 26, bound for Chicago.
Jazz 494, contact back control 13117. 13117, Jazz 494. Ground hello for 153, ground, good morning again, runway 23, altimeter 3026, taxi left on Tango, then Foxtrot, Ultra to Foxtrot Alpha. That's a Tango, Foxtrot, Ultra to Foxtrot Alpha.
Okay, so we now have ourselves lined up here on runway 26, again just the before takeoff checklist left to run. The flight controls, we have full up, full down, and neutral, full left, full right, and neutral, and on the rudder, full left, full right, and neutral. Thrust reversers are both set through to arm, avionics frequencies are set. Autopilot will arm up nav, same there as well for the outcell. For the N1 reminder, our takeoff power setting today is going to be 97% N1. Spoilers are retracted, the light is out. Flaps, again through to flaps 20 here today. A little bit tricky to see here with the slight upslope of the runway, but we are pretty limited in terms of takeoff run. We have flaps 20 indicated. Trim is once again set for takeoff, anti-ice. It is pretty cold outside, we do have a little bit of moisture around as well. Around 4 degrees, so we'll take the engine anti-ice on. Pitot heats are selected on, windshield heat will set through to hold. Radio altimeter is selected on, the primary and secondary inverters are both selected on. Air ignition switches are set on, we do have 2 amber lights. Left to right stall warnings are both selected on, bleed switches are set on. Pressurization is set, the cabin air switch is selected on, climate control is set. The yaw dampers will power up both the primary and the secondary, we'll take those once we're outbound. And for the enunciator warning lights, just working our way through the panel, we've got nacelle heat, expecting to see that, left and right engine anti-ice. Nose wheel steering, I think should be off for the takeoff, but I haven't figured out how to turn that off. It is a bit difficult figuring out these sorts of things without a manual, so I have found the aircraft to be pretty tentative during the takeoff run, very light on the rudder, quite hard to keep on the centre line. I would imagine having the nose wheel steering on certainly doesn't help. Anyway, last light we've got there is windshield heat, again expecting to see that. Transponder is set through to out. Weather radar, again, currently inoperative. Nav lights are selected on. We'll take the strobe lights on here as well. And finally, we'll take the landing lights. Park brake can come off. We'll just hold the aircraft here on the brakes. Through to 40% on the M1, allowing the engines to stabilise. The wind's pretty much straight down the runway. And again, we're looking for 97% here on the M1s, 133 for VR. Off the brakes, and take off. So there's VR V2. And we do have positive climb. Gear can come up. Pitching for around 10 degrees nose up. And tracking runway heading to about through 800 feet. there's 800, so we'll commence the left turn, inbound towards MDOS. Just waiting until we come up through 1500 feet, already up through 160 knots, so we can start to retract the flaps. There's 1500, climb power's set, go flaps 8, and leveling off here at 2000, go flaps up. So bring the thrust back again, maintaining 210 knots for now.
Home run 803, contact 1288. 180, home run 803.
So thrust back at around 70% and 2. And just ever so slightly out to the right of track. Good there in terms of the turn. Just trimming to put the aircraft level. We'll maintain 210 for now. Okay, so the aircraft nicely trimmed. We'll get the heading bug centered up. We'll come into heading. We've got out capture. We'll engage the autopilot. And speed's checked. The after takeoff checklist, power is set, reverses are off, flaps are up, gear is up, lights are out, engine sync, again not currently modelled on the aircraft. Yaw damper is selected on, anti-ice, we'll leave on for now, we're going to be coming up through this cloud layer in just a moment's time. Air ignition switches are selected off, pressurization and climate control. You can see there the cabin altitude currently climbing, and the cabin altitude there just coming up to around 2,000 feet. Hydraulic pressure is checked, angle of attack indicators will cross-check, and both of those looking good. Just adjust our heading back towards MDOS. Passenger signs, we'll leave it on for now till we're up to around 10,000 feet.
Order 153, clear takeoff runway 23. Clear takeoff runway 23, 15.
So once again, once we come through waypoint MDOS, we'll be on a manual leg, expecting radar vectors out towards the next waypoint. That should be on a course of roughly 250.
Order 303 behind company, line up wait runway 23.
Okay, so now on vectors, anchor on the next waypoint. We'll get rid of the suspension. That's going to draw the leg now up towards waypoint ankle. And we'll come here onto heading of 250, 252 for the track. We'll go with around 260 for now. We're probably going to be slightly out to the left of track currently.
Yeah, 781 tower, wind 250, 10, gust 17, clear to land, runway 24 left.
Okay, so there's 252. As soon as we come onto that track, we'll go into nav. We'll assume now here as well that ATC is giving us further climb up to flight level 110.
Order 153, contact departure 128 decimal 8. Departure Porter 153, see ya.
And nicely established now on the CDI. There's nav. And 110, we'll come into outcell. One thing I have had a little bit of an issue with, currently the autopilot, firstly doesn't always seem to capture very well in out hold. Secondly, sometimes it can be a little bit tricky disengaging out hold. In that particular case it worked fine. So we'll just come up on the thrust. We'll accelerate up towards 250 knots and then we'll go into speed hold. So back up to around 95% here on the N2. Maximum of around 830 degrees. I'll set 800 degrees here for the climb.
Set right 510, wind 240 at 10, clear takeoff runway 23.
Okay, it's 250. IS hold. So as you can see overall the autopilot generally works pretty nicely. Again, if you are going to capture an altitude, definitely best to reduce that vertical speed ahead of time. Otherwise you'll capture well below. We might just leave things here in speed hold just to demonstrate that. So holding 250 knots, we'll set the speed bug for now. And up into this cloud layer, again we do have the nacelle anti-ice selected on. So tracking inbound towards Ankol, we've got about 25 miles to run.
Yeah, 781, contact ground 1219. Ground 0.9, 781, good morning.
And now just waiting to up through 10,000 feet, we'll take the landing lights off. centering up that heading bug again. Yeah, so the autopilot generally does a pretty good job, but I think it still needs a little bit of work. Again, on that occasion it worked fine, but I've found occasionally leveling off I can't actually take out hold off, which then means you can't arm up out cell. That could be user error, but again, without the manual it's very difficult to know. So, beautiful views here as we break through this first cloud layer. A little bit of a shame that our routing didn't take us straight past the city centre. That's a pretty spectacular scene as well.
Raz 427, wind 250 at 10, fly heading 330, clear takeoff, runway 23.
Overall though, nice sounds from the aircraft internally. Again, they do need some work externally. The sounds externally during the cruise are pretty decent. You'll hear those in just a moment's time, but certainly during the start, as I said, pretty lackluster.
Aircraft 1043, line up on runway 23.
Line up 23, Aircraft 1043.
Going up through this first cloud layer, we'll probably just leave our passenger set down until we're up through this second cloud layer, even though things are pretty smooth currently. As usual, we'll head outside. The external model of the Lear 35, as you've already seen, I think Flysimware have done a really beautiful job with the aircraft. So we'll enjoy some of that en route, and I'll come back to you again just outside our top descent for our mystery arrival that's probably not all that much of a mystery to many of you, into Chicago.
North American 2121, 9.547, 250 knots.
American 2121, Chicago approach, thank you, 28 center.
Thank you.
American 2653, trim up to 360, maintain 210 knots.
360 heading 250 on the speed, United 2653.
210 on the speed.
210 on the speed, yes ma'am, sorry about that, United 2653.
American 2893, heading 090, reduce speed to 210.
090, heading Swan at 210, American 2893.
Envoy 4129, maintain 170 knots, for greater till Saitek, contact to O'Hare Tower, Saitek 12075.
Alright, Field site United 2653.
Yeah, 2653, clear for the visual approach, 28 center, maintain 210 knots.
210 on speed, clear for visual approach, 28 center, United 2653.
Flight was on 33.62 for me, 442, good day.
Q3, maintain 170 knots, for greater till Saitek, contact O'Hare Tower, Saitek 12075.
Alright, 170 to Saitek, Tower 2075, Saitek, United 2653, good morning.
Ethiopian 574 heavy, good rate to 6,000.
Call approach, good morning, friendly 442, taking at 7,000 to response, 28 center.
Runway 442, Chicago approach, thank you, 28 center it is. Spirit wing 182, reduce speed to 210. 210, Spirit wing 182.
So, welcome back to the flight deck of the Lear 35. As you can see, we're now cruising at flight level 400. We've got about 22 miles to run towards waypoint Bagel. The Learjet 35 flies a very nice 3-degree profile, so we need about 120 miles here for the descent. And as you can see, if we come back to the flight plan, we've got about 88 miles from Charlie Golf Tango, another 20 miles towards the field. By my calculations then we need to descend at 15 miles from Bagel, which we're currently just approaching. Going to initially descend down to 5,000 feet. So we'll pre-select that. Once again, it does take a little while here to work your way through the selection. As soon as we hit that 15-mile point, we'll come out of out hold, and again we'll just use the autopilot pitch mode here to put the nose down initially. Of course, we're going to have to reduce the thrust just to keep us away from our MMO. Currently cruising at Mach 0.78.
Direct George, I'll resume the arrival, skies 5302.
Okay, so there's 5,000 pre-selected. We'll come out of out hold. That's what I mean. Occasionally I do have issues coming out of out hold with the aircraft, which I don't think is probably correct. We've got 5,000 pre-selected. We'll just try a different mode here. If we come into vertical speed.
American 2893, start going to your final approach speed. Looks like the United had to explode quite a bit.
Okay, so eventually we've come out of out hold. We're now armed up out cell. We'll get the nose down. And again, we're going to fly a 3-degree profile, so we want 5% here of our ground speed, currently doing 420 knots. So we need a descent rate of around 2,100 feet per minute.
Spirit 182, trim left hand 360. Left turn 360, Spirit 182.
And again, just slowly reducing the power here to make sure we stay within our MMO. As before, it could just be user error here with the autopilot. Difficult to know without the manual. I suspect not in the case of the outhold though. I think you probably should be able to come out of outhold at any time. Okay, so there's 2,100 feet. We'll just leave the aircraft as it is for now. We can refine the profile later on once we've got everything briefed up and set up. Approaching waypoint Bagel. Next course is going to be 276. So we'll set that here on the CDI. And just slowly coming back up on the power, we'll build up a little bit of speed here as well in the descent. 400 knots now, so 2,000 feet per minute, working out perfectly for us. As usual, we'll brief up the arrival, we'll get the aircraft set up thereafter. I do apologise in advance for the quality here of the chart. It was a bit tricky to find a decent rendition of the chart. Just slew that heading bug around. So again, we're going to leave the arrival field a little bit of a mystery for anyone that hasn't guessed it yet, but we're going to be flying the shore visual approach for runway 36, inbound towards Chicago. It's a pretty straightforward procedure overall. We do, however, need 1,900 foot on the cloud visibility and 6 miles in terms of the visibility, both of which we do have at the moment, but only just. The cloud base is around 2,000 feet currently. So we're now tracking inbound towards the Charlie Golf Tango. We can tune that up.
Ethiopian 574 Heavy, flighting 250, intercept localizers.
They'll go waypoint info, 114.2, we'll set that in the active. We should pick that up in just a moment's time.
Runway 442, descend maintain 5,000.
8,000 for friendly, 442.
So as I say, tracking inbound towards Charlie Golf Tango, that's the Chicago Heights VOR. The arrival itself, once we're overhead the VOR, we're going to be coming onto a course of 356. The plan initially is to descend down to 5,000 feet. Once we're within range of the VOR, we can descend down to 3,500. And crossing over the VOR, we can descend down to 2,000 feet. We'll be maintaining 2,000 feet outbound on that radial of 356. And holding 2,000 until either we're visual with the airfield. We need to be visual by 16 miles from the station, otherwise it's going to be a missed approach. Obviously we'll talk through the whole process as we go, but it's a fun little arrival overall. In terms of the terrain, the MSA for the arrival is 3,500 feet, hence why we're maintaining that until we're overhead the station. Weather-wise, not a bad day overall. There is a few showers of snow in the area, and again we do have a fairly low cloud base, around 2,000 feet. But at the moment the weather conditions are good enough for the approach. In terms of the landing, again landing on runway 36, we'll be vacating off to the left. It's going to be manual braking, full reverse. It's a fairly short runway, although we do have a pretty healthy headwind. We've got around 12 knots off the nose. QNH is 2962, we'll set that once we come down through flight level 180. In terms of our fuel state, we've burned our way through around £1,500 thereabouts, so we've got about £4,500 still on board the aircraft. We're burning around £1,600 an hour, so about an extra 3 hours of fuel. We've got plenty of fuel on board the jet. And plenty of options in the area. We've got Midway, O'Hare, plenty of runways, and plenty of ILSs if the visibility does deteriorate. That's about it in terms of the briefing. In terms of getting the aircraft set up here for the arrival, we can first set our speeds here on the ASI. So we'll set 200 knots initially for the configuration. We can take flaps through to 20 below 200 knots. VREF is 135, we're going to add 5 knots to that, so V approach 140. And we can take flaps 40 below 150, so we'll set the second speed bug there for that. Speed building up now to around 280 knots, ground speed still 400, just a little bit shy there on that descent rate now. And just coming down through 30,000 feet, so we need about 90 miles to run. 60 plus the 20, about 84, we are getting just a little bit high. So we'll just increase that descent rate and come off the power again to maintain the speed. Go with around 3,000 feet per minute. Going to be coming back down into the clouds. Icing conditions are anticipated, so we'll take the nacelle heat on. And we'll get our passenger sat back down. So VREFs and speeds are checked. The avionics frequencies, we've got 114.2 there on nav 1. And we'll tune up the midway ILS on nav 2, that's a frequency of 109.9.
250 now, 7,000, Sky 5302.
Crossing over the localizer there for the ILS is going to give us one of the waypoints on the inbound sector, but we don't really need it for the purposes of the flight here today. Just use the radial. We've got nav 2 selected on the right hand side. Anti-ice, again we've got the nacelle heat selected on, the windshield heat again set through to hold. The pressurization, we can set that now back down towards sea level. Interestingly not showing as clickable there, but it is.
Road Sky 5302, 9,500, descend at 7,000, good morning.
Sky 5302, Chicago approach. Runway is 28 center.
28 center, Sky 5302.
Okay, so we've got sea level selected. You can see the cabin altitude there is reducing. Currently around 5,000 feet. Delta PSI is around 7.0. So pressurization is set. Just coming down through flight level 260. Low, again, flight level 180 will set the altimeters, and down through 10 we'll take the landing lights on. Showing about 52 miles here to run towards the Charlie Golf Tango. And just about to come down through the tops of the clouds, back into the weather for our approach in towards Chicago.
Alright, 13362 envoy 3367, how's it going?
Bridgejet 3404, depart Cato heading 360, descend now, maintain 8,000.
Descend now to 8,000 and depart Cato heading 360, Bridgejet 3404.
Approach envoy 3367 at 10.4, descending 7,000, 250 in the speed.
Envoy 3367, Chicago first, thank you, 28 center.
Okay, so we're just coming down through 10,000 feet. 10,000 feet means we need around 30 miles to run, currently showing around 32. Speed's good, just coming back through 250 knots. We'll take the landing lights on. And again, we have the seatbelt sign selected on. Want to get the aircraft slowed up to around 180 knots before we make the turn through Charlie Golf Tango. They'll just come all the way back through to idle here on the power. The approach checks, the circuit breakers are checked, hydraulic pressure is checked, emergency air pressure looks good. In terms of the fuel state, down to around 4,500 pounds. Again, we've burned our way through 1,600. And we've got the crossflow selected to closed, transfer selected off. Speeds are set, frequencies are set. We are now picking up the midway ILS there as well. That's the approach checklist complete. So again, speed slowly reducing, and we're looking for 200 knots before we start configuring the aircraft. Once we come overhead Charlie Golf Tango, we're going to be turning onto that course of 356. So just a transition between GPS and VOR nav. We'll do that initially in heading. There's 350, 356. And we can set that up ahead of time as well here on the CDI.
Chicago approach on 8402 heavy, leaving 10,700, descending 7,000.
356. 7,000 feet, 21 miles is what we need. We've got about 25 now, so we're a little bit low. We can start shallowing off that descent. That's going to allow us to reduce the speed here as well. Once again, back down into the cloud layer, nacelle anti-ice is selected on. We'll reduce our vertical speed back to around a VS of minus 1,000.
Sunlight 442, caution, white turbo, zero, following a heavy, Bolin is 787, 5 miles on it.
And we'll hold the configuration here till we're around the corner. We've got about 20 miles to slow up and configure.
Runway 442, advise airport in sight, off your left in 20 miles.
So everything looking pretty good here at the moment. We'll aim to get our speed back towards 180.
Runway 442, I'll give you your clearance shortly.
And you can see we are just about to commence that turn. The aircraft's going to have us on 001, so once we've more or less completed the turn, we'll come back into heading on the autopilot.
Runway 442, flight in 300, clear visual approach to it center.
6,000 feet, so 18 miles, we got 22. And turning now back out towards the north.
300, clear for visual 28 center, 2442.
So again, fairly low cloud base, we're down at around 6,000. The base of this cloud layer should be around 2,000 feet, just above what we need for the approach.
City 302, reduce speed to 210, trim off 360.
And just leaving ourselves in GPS navigation for the time being, as the aircraft does a very nice job of following the planned track. You can see it does preempt the turn there slightly. If we wanted to calculate that ourselves, it's a 90-degree turn. We're doing about 165 knots, so 1% of our ground speed, 1.6 miles. If we started the turn about 1.6 miles from the station, that would work out pretty nicely. Okay, so we'll come now into heading. 5,000 feet, 15 miles, we've got about 19 to run, still looking good. We'll come into VOR navigation. And we'll just keep the heading slightly out to the left till we come onto the CDI, then we'll come back into nav. Over the VOR now as well, so we can descend down to 2,000 feet. And there's nav capture. We've still got outsell for 2,000. Speed looking good there at 180. We'll start configuring, so we'll take flaps 8.
Upon 8402 heavy, descend and maintain 5,000.
Descend maintain 5,000, Tony upon 8402 heavy.
And just adjusting the thrust here to maintain the speed. So as I say, we'll continue the descent here down to 2,000 feet. Maintaining 2,000 until we're 60 miles out from the station. 4,500, so we're still slightly low here on the profile.
Envoy 3367, descend and maintain 7,000, maintain 250 knots.
We'll maintain 180 till around 10 miles, then bring the speed back towards 160. Looks as though the aircraft's doing a reasonable job here of tracking the radial outbound.
Center maintain 7,000, 250 on the speed on board 3367.
And again, just as a reference, we do have the midway ILS tuned up there on nav 2. So speed's good, 4,000 feet, 15 miles, we're about 3 miles off what we need. We'll maintain the config just a little bit longer. In terms of the before landing items, we'll hold the gear, we'll hold the TORs here as well until we're down through the cloud layer and visual with the airfield. In the meantime, we'll just get a few other items ticked off. So the air ignition switches can go on, landing lights are selected on, anti-skid is set, spoilers are retracted, they're just the flaps, engine sync is selected off, reversers are armed. So we've just got the gear, the TORs and the flaps to come. Again, slowly trending back towards profile. We've got about another 13 miles to run. We are just coming visual here with the ground as well, so we should be visual by 2,000 feet.
Envoy 3367, contact approach on 133.62, good day.
And as discussed, we will need to level off at 2,000. Once we're visual, or either through 60 miles, it's going to be continuing on towards the field or a missed approach. We've got midway filed as the alternate, which is pretty much abeam the aircraft currently. But I don't think we're going to need that. We are now visual with the ground. So just approaching 10 miles, we'll get the speed back towards 160. We'll come through to flaps 20.
Alright, 13362 on board 3367, how's it going?
Just increasing that descent rate slightly, 3,000 foot, just approaching 11 miles, so looking pretty good in terms of the profile. Take the gear down. And as we are now visual, we'll inhibit the TORS function. Otherwise, I think with it being a user-created airport, we're going to get spurious TORS warnings, so TORS inhibit.
Alright, descend now to 8,000 and depart Cato heading 360 for car 3404.
1,000 to go. Looking good now on the speed, so back up on the thrust. We are certainly visual. And approaching 10 miles. Still just a little bit low, so we'll reduce that vertical speed. We have gear down, 3 greens, flaps currently selected through to 20, 20 indicated. We'll hold the flaps for now, we need to be below 150, flaps 40. And we still got around 9 miles to run. So visual with the field, I don't know whether or not you can make it out yet. I'm sure most of you at this point do know which field we're looking for. We've got the Chicago skyline there off in the distance, off the nose, rather beautiful. Looks like we've got a bit of a snow shower there out towards the east of the field. So almost maintaining a level segment currently, again, just to get us back on a profile. Speed's good, through 8 miles, we've got the gear down. As I say, I do find the aircraft is a little bit springy in pitch in the approach configuration. We'll perhaps talk more about that as we fly the approach itself. So 2,500, 8 miles, again looking good. Ground speed 110, so 500 feet per minute. Should do us pretty good in terms of the descent. Start reducing now back towards 140.
November 445, left turn out to the south is approved, runway 24, clear for takeoff.
Left turn out to the south approved, runway 24, clear for takeoff, Cessna 7445.
So just slowly bringing the thrust back again through 150, we'll take flaps 40. That's obviously going to give us quite a bit of drag.
Flight number 03 Hotel, leave the airspace, frequency change approved, see you on the way back.
Okay, just going into out capture, we'll get rid of the autopilot. One thing I have noticed, I don't seem to be able to get rid of the flight directors, even when taking out the autopilot modes. If I just turn the autopilot master off, that'll get rid of the flight directors, we don't need those anymore. And again, you can see the aircraft just pogoing there a little bit in pitch. Needing a little bit of aft trim there as well.
That's 7445, 30 approach change over to New York.
Overall, I do like the flight model of the Learjet in terms of the aircraft being pretty easy to hand fly, which is good. I don't think the autopilot is something you want to rely on heavily at this sort of stage in the flight. As usual, the aircraft has apparently been tested by real-world Learjet pilots, so I'm sure they know more than I do. And roll the aircraft feels good. Again, it just feels a little bit odd to me in pitch. Okay, we're good on the speed. We'll go through to flaps 40.
Number 445, with frequency change over New York is approved, stay track.
And put in a boot full of thrust there as well to maintain the speed. Looking good now back at V approach, 140 knots.
Frequency approved, thank you. 445.
So the runway, if you haven't spotted it yet, is just off the nose. And of course, the destination, Meigs. I'm sure most of you would already guess that, as I say. For those of you who aren't aware, I'm sure there's plenty of you, since many of you will have joined the hobby with Microsoft Flight Simulator, but Meigs is a classic of the franchise.
That's 7 Tango Charlie, turn left Alpha 2, ground 1A.
It was in pretty much every Microsoft Flight Simulator series up until, unfortunately, the airfield was actually decommissioned. I gather it was the mayor of Chicago that actually closed it down.
Left Alpha 2, ground 1A, 7 Tango Charlie.
Which is a shame, it's such a classic airfield, and a really beautiful location, as you can see.
Looking out for number 2, have traffic, 567, just runway 24.
So it looks like we're showing 2 whites there on the Pappy at the moment. Again, just coming through a little bit of snow. We've got another snow shower there out towards the west of the city. Wind's out from the north, so we should be able to beat the weather in.
Okay, that's ground system 927 Tango Charlie, bumping Alpha 2, going back to the base of the tower.
So slightly high on the Pappy, but I'm pretty happy with where we are visually.
Cessna 9027 Tango Charlie, that's ground taxi back to tower via Echo.
And I'd make the same mistake every time, but really got to stop following the Pappies in the sim. They're not always very accurate. In this particular case, I think they'd be putting us a bit low, but often I find they tend to lead to a bit of a long landing. We've got a marina there, just passing below the aircraft.
Here's 3-4 Alpha Sierra, Dutchess Tower, extra left down, runway 24.
And as I say, the aircraft feels a little bit strange in pitch. Having to make lots of pitch inputs, and the aircraft pretty much just returns back to where you had it previously. The behaviour though is subtle, it's not something that's going to ruin the experience of the aircraft for you necessarily. As I say, it's still enjoyable to hand fly, and I'm still very able to do so.
Clear for takeoff, runway 24, short to landing and left traffic on the go 74+.
Just giving the little Learjet a little bit more power, bring the speed back up towards 140.
After 37 Bravo, runway 24, clear for the option.
8237 Bravo, runway 24, clear for the option.
We're not going to finesse the landing too much. Again, it's a pretty short runway. We'll just get the aircraft down on the deck, full reverse, braking as we need it, vacating off to the left.
This is 567, when able, you can make right traffic this time around. Right traffic.
500.
It's coming through 500 foot there on the rad out. I think we got quite lucky there. If we'd been back at the missed approach point with this sort of weather, we may not have seen the field.
Sierra 269 Juliet, Dutchess Tower, report to midfield left down, runway 24.
Feels like we've got a very slight crosswind here out from the left, just pushing the aircraft off to the right of the centre line. Speed's good, one red, one white now on the Pappy. Again, oscillating quite a bit here in pitch. Some of that may be my flying. Over the threshold. And cutting the power. There's touchdown. Again, full reverse. And onto the brakes. You can see there, pretty stiff headwind. Straight down 3-6. We'll vacate off to the next left. So vacating off to the left, find ourselves a spot to park up. We may as well turn 90 degrees here onto the apron, allow us to enjoy the beautiful views of Chicago here as we shut down.
67 has traffic. The 567, number 2 behind that traffic, runway 24, quickly after.
So onto the brakes, the park brake is set for the after landing checks. The flaps can come up. Spoilers are retracted, reverses
And it was that 567, so you approach south.
are disarmed, the flaps are indicating up. Strobe lights are off. Same there for the landing lights. The air ignition switches
Sierra 4 off, Sierra, turn base.
Turn base, 3 off Sierra.
are selected off. Cabin air is off, anti-ice. Once again taking the nose hole heat off. Same there as well for the pitot heats. And for the windshield heat. We've had 2 minutes here for the cool down, so we'll shut down engine number 1.
Criterion, speed delta microphone, Sierra's turning 2 mile left base.
Transponder is set through to standby. Weather radar is off, hydraulic pressure is checked. The shutdown checklist, once again the park brake is set, anti-ice is off, electrical switching, take the rad out off, emergency battery is selected off, basically just working our way through the systems here, taking everything off except for the fuel computers, the anti-skid, the bleed air, jet pumps and the pitch trim. Take the signs off, our passenger can start getting ready to deplane. Okay, so switching is set, standby attitude gyro is caged. Emergency power system is selected off. We'll cut number 2. Start generator switches.
That's a 445. When able, make a left 360, 4 spaces.
Are selected off. Inverter switches are off. Fuel transfer is off. Crossflow is closed. Exterior lights. Take the beacon light off. And the batteries are off. That is, the shutdown check is complete. Here on the ground in a rather wintry Chicago. So there you go, ladies and gents. I do hope you enjoyed our outing in the Flysimware Learjet 35A, and another look at the absolute classic that is Meigs Field within Microsoft Flight Simulator. As usual, to finish up the video, we'll run through a few points regarding the product. Do bear in mind once again though, this is an early access version of the aircraft, so we'll keep things fairly brief in certain categories. Starting with the modelling and texturing. Externally, really nothing I can fault there. I think the modelling and texturing are both absolutely superb. I'm sure you'll agree that during the flight, the aircraft looked very photorealistic externally. And internally, again, the modelling is very nice. The texturing does still need some work. Flysimware are aware of that themselves. There are certain parts of the cockpit which still have lower resolution textures, presumably a hangover from the P3D version of the aircraft. And similarly, some of the texturing internally doesn't look quite as photorealistic in the cockpit as we've seen from the likes of the Cessna 414. Already, visually the aircraft is up to a very good standard, but we know that Flysimware can do better, so I'm sure we'll see further improvements to the product going forward. With regards to the flight model, personally I have a few qualms about it at the moment. Again, the aircraft has supposedly been trialled by real-world Learjet pilots, so far be it for me to say that the flight model is incorrect, but it's not the nicest aircraft that I've hand-flown in the sim. Again, Flysimware's own 414 has an excellent flight model, and I didn't feel that the Learjet quite stacked up against that. My main issue with the flight model, as discussed, is the aircraft's handling and pitch. To me, it did feel as though the aircraft was pogoing slightly in the pitch axis, and you'll probably have seen that for yourself throughout the flight. Again, the aircraft is generally nice to hand fly. I did enjoy the experience, but going off Flysimware's previous work with the Cessna 414, I think we could again see further improvements to the aircraft, and I hope that we do. Systems-wise, the Learjet 35 is already fairly comprehensive. Again, I think there are further tweaks to come. The systems depth already I would say above average, with the various systems tests being able to be run, for example. But there are still various systems, the oxygen system for example, not modelled, which again I would expect to see worked on in future updates. I don't expect we'll see any failure modelling on the aircraft, given that we haven't seen anything similar with the 414. With regards to the sounds of the aircraft, overall very good internally already. Both the engine sounds and the cockpit sounds, the various controls and equipment all modelled very nicely. The external sounds were good during the cruise, but certainly during the startup, for example, quite a lot more work still needed there. And again, I suspect we will see that work done. The Cessna 414 has pretty excellent sounds overall. Once more, I would say some of the best available within the sim. In terms of extras, the product is again pretty good. We have the onboard tablet with various options available, for example, external chocks, ground power. We also have visible passengers. No option to display the pilots internally, but with the cramped cockpit of the Learjet 35, maybe that's even a good thing. The included extras are basically what you'd expect from this sort of product, although it would have been nice to have Navigraph integration, SimBrief integration as well with the tablet. As far as the documentation goes, that is one area where the product sorely lacks currently. As a result of early access, no documentation, no manual is included with the aircraft. Flysimware are very upfront about this, so fair enough, but it did make learning the Learjet a little bit trickier. I'm sure I probably made a few mistakes along the way, but thanks to JD's excellent checklist, hopefully we managed to operate the aircraft in a reasonably realistic fashion, and certainly a very big thank you to JD for all of his hard work on that checklist. Lastly, touching on the Learjet 35's FPS. Overall the aircraft's pretty solid actually. I was getting around 58 FPS in the Learjet 35 versus around 64 in the default Cessna 152. In summary then, once again, the Learjet 35A is an early access aircraft. There will still be many improvements to come. And again, it's probably worth reiterating, I also own the Flysimware Cessna 414. There have been a prolific amount of updates with that aircraft. I'm sure we'll see the same with the Learjet. The 414 went from being a very solid add-on to an absolutely superb add-on over the course of its upgrades. Ahead of this review, I wasn't actually sure whether or not I was going to enjoy the Learjet. I'm not a huge business jet flyer myself, and the internal visuals were putting me off the product slightly. Overall though, despite a few shortfalls, I have to say that I really enjoyed my flight in the aircraft, and I'm very much looking forward to the future updates provided by Flysimware. It is really nice to finally have a retro business jet available for the sim, replete with all of its analogue gauges. This sort of aircraft is very much more up my street than the likes of the Honda Jet or the Vision Jet. Really good fun to operate, a nice little challenge as well, and I think the Learjet has bags of character. If you haven't done so before, go away and read some pilot testimonials regarding the aircraft. It certainly sounds like flying the Learjet was a pretty interesting experience. Anyway, as I say, very much looking forward to the finished product, but hopefully this video has given you a good idea of what you'll get in early access. As we did with the Cessna 414, we'll probably come back and take another look at the Learjet once it's complete. For now though, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, once again, please do consider giving it a like. If you'd like to see more content from the channel, then please consider subscribing as well. And as before, if you'd like to help support the channel further, you can do so by becoming a channel member or patron. I'll leave a link to both of those down in the video description below. As always, a huge thank you to my channel members and patrons that make this content possible. And to all of you, I hope you're having a great day wherever you are. Take really good care, and I will see you all again soon.